I'll wait a bit, Sue, before I start. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. My name is Mary Sayers, and I am the CEO of the National Disability Research Partnership. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm joining you from the lands of the Bunurong people. Just a brief visual description of me. I've got medium length hair. I'm a white woman, middle-aged, and I'm wearing a red t-shirt with glasses. So, um, welcome everyone. It's great to see so many of you here today. I would now like to do an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands which we're meeting today across Australia. We know this land was never ceded. We honour elders past and present and recognise First Nations people as the world's first researchers. We acknowledge the deep knowledge systems that have existed here for thousands of generations. I also want to acknowledge any First Nations people here today. I acknowledge you, your elders and ancestors. So, we've got a number of people who are still continuing to join us. What we're going to cover today, and perhaps before I begin, I'll introduce the team that we have here. We've got Sue Tape, who's our Deputy CEO and Head of Evidence to Action. We've got Catherine Raphael, who's our Research Programs Manager. Jess Rosenthal, who is our Events Engagement Coordinator, and Bethany Devonish, who's our our Commissioned Research Programs Manager, but also is our Safety and Wellbeing Officer for today. So welcome to all the team as well. So today is about helping understand what the National Disability Research Partnership means when we talk about research led by and with people with disability, and how this shapes the 2026 Disability Research Funding Round. At the National Disability Research Partnership, or the NDRP, as you'll hear this acronym a lot today, we fund research where people with disability are not participants or advisors on the team, but leaders, co-researchers and co-decision makers. Funding this round is designed to support collaborative, inclusive research that produces evidence that can genuinely influence policy and practice. This session is designed to help you understand what we're funding in 2026, understand what makes a strong application, understand how you can budget for access and inclusion, and hopefully feel confident in preparing your proposal. We really want this to be practical and clear. To start with, I'm going to remind you of the NDRP strategic agenda and guiding principles, and emphasise our commitment to research by and with people with disability. We will explain what we're funding, the topics, the amounts, and the types of research. Then Catherine will explain who you might partner with, what an administrating organisation is, and who should or could be on the research team. She'll explain what strong disability-led research looks like in practice. We'll then take a short break, giving you time to reflect and prepare any questions. After the break, Sue will cover what should be covered in a project budget for access and inclusion. And we will cover questions that have been submitted in advance. And we had a lot of questions submitted in advance. And if we don't get to all of your questions today, I would really encourage you to join one of our Q&A sessions. We have those planned over the coming weeks, and the team will put the links to registering for the Q&A sessions. And we'll wrap up with some key takeaways, provide the details on those sessions, including the drop-in Q&As, and highlight some other supports, opportunities that we have. And at the end of this, you'll have an evaluation survey, and we'd really appreciate your feedback. We do try and learn from everything we do. Before we get into too much meaty content, as you will see, we have Auslan interpretation, and that's available via the Zoom interpretation feature, and live captions available. And check the Zoom chat for the link as well. The chat function is on for today's event. We welcome your reflections, encouragement, and respectful conversation. And please keep in mind that the chat will be monitored to ensure the space remains a safe and inclusive space for everyone. In addition to the chat,
Sue
we
speak.
have, sorry, Sue.
Jess, are you trying to bring our attention to something?
We might continue, Jess. Perhaps if you could just message Sue, because we can't hear you. Um, The In addition to the chat, the Zoom Q&A function is switched on throughout this event. So if you prefer remain anonymous or want to log your questions privately, please use this feature and our team will monitor both channels to ensure your questions are addressed sensitively. If you prefer not to follow the chat during the event, because it can be a little bit distracting as well, rest assured that we'll be summarising the key chat themes without names in post-event materials, along with answers to any questions raised, and all resources and links will be shared. This way you can stay focused on the speakers and still access the important information afterwards. So as I said before, behind the scenes, Sue, Kiera and Jess from the NDRP will be managing this event. And we have Bethany available, who is our Safety and Wellbeing Officer, who you can private message throughout this session if anything does come up that causes any concerns. Today's meeting is being run in Zoom meeting format. You can switch between speaker view and gallery views, and there'll be a 10-minute break at 1:25. And this session is being recorded and will be shared on YouTube. So if you need any assistance, you can message the team in the chat as well. Okay. Moving ahead, before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the depth and quality of questions submitted ahead of today's session. What stands out to us is not just the number of questions, but what they represent. We are seeing researchers, advocates, community organisations, and people with disability asking very thoughtful and sophisticated questions about co-design, disability leadership, partnership models, governance, impact, and how research genuinely shifts policy and practice. And that tells us something really important, that this is a maturing disability research ecosystem, which is so exciting. And because this funding round is not simply about grants administration or distributing funding, it's part of a broader movement of change in disability research. The questions we've received are about what strong applications look like, how partnerships should work, what disability-led research means in practice, and how projects can deliver impact within 12 months. And it shows the sector is increasingly thinking about research that is different and doing things differently. And we're really excited about that. You'll hear us respond to many of these themes throughout today's sessions. And we do also encourage people to make full use of the resources available, including carefully reading the funding guidelines and the FAQs, and attending dedicated Q&A sessions. which are intended to go into much more detail about applications and eligibility questions. So let's get into it. So many of you will already know, I'm quite sure, what the NDRP does. And the strategic agenda is to advance high quality, impactful research that impacts on policy and practice. We do this by funding research that's informed by the research agenda, enabling inclusion and participation, and research should promote full inclusion and meaningful participation across all aspects of life for people with disability. And building capacity for inclusive research. This means not just conducting research about people with disability, but empowering people with disability to lead and co-create the research and driving that evidence into action. We're committed to ensuring that research outcomes inform policies, practice, and systems that deliver real-world changes. These objectives are critical because they align with broader national priorities, including Australia's disability strategy, which sets out a vision for an inclusive society where people with disability are engaged, support, and values. So our work is shaped and guided by the guiding principles. So research by and with people with disability, we really aim to shift the paradigm. People with disability aren't just people in research, they're leaders, co-creators and decision makers throughout the process. Collaboration across sectors. We foster partnerships between researchers, organisations, government and people with disability to ensure the work is both inclusive and impactful. Equity and justice. Our projects are designed to challenge systemic barriers and promote fairness across systems, recognising the intersectional nature of disability experiences. And knowledge mobilisation. We prioritise translating research findings into actionable outcomes, whether that's influencing policy, improving systems, or changing community attitudes. So let's get into the details of what's included in this research funding round. We were so excited to launch the week before last our research funding with the Minister for the NDIS, Jenny McAllister, announcing the launch. And so we have $5 million funding available through this research. The first theme is on this topic of safety of people with disability. And there's two streams of research there. In opportunity 1A, teams define their own questions and their own safety focus. However, in option 2B, which is the targeted research, there's specific funding available for pathways to elimination of restrictive practices. And we define safety quite broadly, freedom from harm, abuse, neglect, and exploitation, but also the presence of trust, respect, and inclusive systems. And so all of the funding, and you can see that on the slide, is up to $300,000 per team for a 12-month funding program. For the open safety topic, there's $2.4 million available. And for the targeted topic of safety of people with disability, again, duration of funding is 12 months and up to $300,000 per team. And there's a total of $600,000. We've introduced a new theme into our funding this year, which is accessible and inclusive, communities. And again, the funding parameters, the research questions are initiated by teams. There's funding duration of 12 months and up to $300,000 per team. So a total of $2 million worth of funding. And so we're very excited about everything that we have available. Um, so I guess in terms of safety, as I mentioned, for the open funding round, it's freedom from harm, violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And it includes emotional safety, cultural safety, digital safety, accessible systems, and transparent and accountable structures. And for the targeted opportunity, we are seeking evidence to support pathways to elimination of restrictive practices, not just a reduction in restrictive practices. We really want this research to be quite transformational on what are the pathways to get to the end result of elimination of restrictive practices. For accessible and inclusive communities, again, digital accessibility, built environment access, AI and accessibility, economic inclusion, social participation, and I think importantly to note, the projects must support inclusion for all people with disability, not just, whilst it's important, not just people who are on the NDIS. This is about the people across Australia, whether or not they have an NDIS plan, and we're really taking a broad view of accessible and inclusive communities. I might just check, Sue, whether the Auslan is still spotlighted. Just wanted to double check that.
Sue speaking. Yes, I can see the interpreter channel working.
Terrific, thank you. So some core information sources for 2026. Obviously, the guiding principles, our research agenda, our research funding policy, the funding guidelines. Please, I cannot emphasize enough, read those funding guidelines before starting your application. And the full guideline document has a breakdown of each theme, definitions and scope, examples of suitable project ideas, eligibility requirements, and budget guidelines. There's also frequently asked questions on our website, and as new questions come up, including if any come up today or any of our drop-in sessions, we'll update the FAQs throughout, so everyone has access to exactly the same information. We've also got a number of resources and videos. We also have the APO Disability Research Collection. And please do subscribe to our newsletter because that's where we provide information as a major vehicle for information about the research funding round and register for sessions. We'll also encourage you to attend our evidence to action sessions where we go deeper into each of the themes of safety and accessible and inclusive communities. So I also wanted to highlight some practical resources that are available to support you as you develop your applications. These resources we've created to ensure strong disability-led research and what happens when teams invest in early partnerships and co-design. On the left, you'll see our Advocacy 101 and Good Partnerships resources. And I understand the teams put the links to those on our web in the chat. And these are really helpful if you're working with advocacy organisations or community partners. They include a partnership resource pack and guidance on co-design partnerships as a mutual exchange, which is about understanding that partnerships should be two-way, respectful and genuinely shared. On the right are our co-design of research resources. These step through the practical side of code design, starting with what co-design actually means, then planning for purposeful co-design, examples of co-design in action, and how to build a strong application. These resources are not extra reading for the sake of it. They're designed to help you. We've also got a YouTube channel and they're another practical set of resources and our videos are available and the links are there. And you'll see videos on Advocacy 101 and building partnership, co-design of research from the start, evidence mobilisation and making research easier to find and share, how research can influence policy and practice. And we've also linked videos to our research agenda topics, including safety of people with disability, elimination of restrictive practices, and inclusive and accessible communities. So these are designed to help teams. There's also a range of Auslan videos that we have available. And so if you're refining your application and want a clearer sense of what we're looking for, these videos can be a great place to start. So let's go into timelines. Let me quickly work through the timeline for this funding round so everyone has an idea of what happens and when. The guidelines were released on the 23rd of February and the application form opened at the same time. From that point, you have an 8-week window with applications closing on the 20th of April at 5 p.m. AEST. And as of today's session, that's 49 sleeps. And I really do want to remind you that it is AEST, Australian Eastern Standard Time, when applications close. And just be aware if you're from the West Coast, that it's not 5 p.m. In Western Australian time. And I guess we really want to encourage people, don't leave it till the last day to put your application in, just in case you have any technical problems. We can problem solve those before the closing date because no applications will be received after the closing date. We're also holding 2 evidence to action sessions, one focused on accessible and inclusive communities and another on safety of people with disability to help think about the policy impact of the research applications that you might fund and how the research can be designed for real world change. So after the form or the application form closes, we then move into assessment. And independent review panels will assess eligible applications against the published criteria and the funding outcomes will then be announced. So successful projects are expected to start from the 1st of July and run for up to 12 months, finishing by the 30th of June 2027. Some of the key messages here is start early, use the support opportunities available, and don't leave your applications to the final day, final week. Get them in nice and early so that you've got a lot of time. And we designed this timeline to give people enough time to prepare their applications. And the key message here is this is not traditional investigator-led research with consultation added later. Strong applications will demonstrate shared leadership, genuine co-design, policy relevance from the beginning, and clear plans for knowledge mobilisations and how findings will be used, not just published. So to explain what a strong disability-led application is, I'd now like to introduce Catherine Raphael, our Research Programs Manager. And Catherine, along with Kira O'Reilly, our Project Support Officer, oversees this delivery of the funding round and will take you through what we're really looking for. So over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Mary. Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Raphael. My pronouns are she, her. I'm joining from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I have light skin, long dark hair tied back, and I'm wearing glasses and a black shirt with white spots. So this section is about what strong disability-led research actually looks like when reviewers read your application. The assessment process is designed to identify projects that show real leadership by people with disability, not just involvement. So this slide shows something that sits at the heart of how the NDRP approaches research teams. what you'll see here are the 4 key parts of a strong research team for this funding round. First, the administering organisation. So this is the organisation that holds the funding agreement and supports the project delivery. Second, the contact person. This is the person who communicates with the NDRP and coordinates the application process. And then third, the partner organisation or organisations. These are not just supporters or advisors. They need to have a real material role in the project and in decision making. And finally, the research team members, the people who actually lead and carry out the work, including people with disability with lived experience expertise. And the reason that this is shown as a circle is intentional. So this is not a hierarchy. These parts are connected, and strong applications show how leadership, decision-making, and responsibility move between them rather than sitting with one person or one institution. So we're not asking for a traditional research structure where authority sits with one lead investigator. Instead, we're looking for teams that show how leadership, decision-making, and accountability are shared across the project. The arrows at the center represent collaboration and movement, how these parts of the team work together and influence each other. So as we move into the next section, what I want you to think about is not just who is on your team, but how power and decision-making actually work within your project. And just as a reminder, team members can only appear on one application across the whole round. Because so when we're looking at the whole of your team, that's what reviewers will be looking for, and that's what we're going to unpack next. Okay, so I'm now going to focus in on criterion 3. So criterion 3 is looking at leadership and inclusion of people with a disability, and it's worth 25%. So this criterion focuses on how the project promotes leadership, participation, and inclusion of people with disability. All applicants are required to provide their response to assessment criterion 3 in plain English without any acronyms, jargon, or technical language. So let's break this down a bit more. So the first thing that we're going to start with is the lived experience leadership, because this is really central to what the NDRP means by research led by and with people with disability. Strong applications show that people with disability have shaped the proposal from the beginning, not just reviewed it at the end. Reviewers will be looking for clear roles, real decision-making authority, and leadership that sits within governance and delivery, not just participation in activities. And I want to emphasize this point. Reviewers are looking for evidence of genuine power sharing. So this means moving beyond token roles or advisory positions that don't actually influence decision. So the second area is governance and how decisions are made. You notice that the application form uses the terms contact person and administering organisation rather than lead investigator. That language is intentional. It reflects the NDRP's commitment to more equal partnerships and shared leadership structures. So when reviewers read your application, they're looking for clarity around questions like who actually makes decisions? How are disagreements worked through? And how does lived experience shape the direction of the project as it progresses? Strong applications make this visible. They don't assume reviewers will infer it. The third area is co-design and partnership. Co-design means working across the entire project from design to delivery to interpretation of findings and through to outputs. It's not a single workshop or consultation process. And similarly, partner organizations need to have a real material role in the project, not just a letter of support or an in-kind contribution. Reviewers will be looking for evidence that partners are actively involved in shaping and delivering the research. So what does good practice look like? Strong applications often include things like shared governance groups, clearly paid roles for lived experience experts, accessible meetings and materials built into the project from the start, and space for reflection and adaptation as the project progresses. These are all indicators that inclusion and leadership have been designed into the project, not added later. And just as importantly, there are some common pitfalls that we see. For example, listing people on the team without clear roles or responsibilities, using advisory groups as a substitute for real leadership roles, governance structures that quietly default back to traditional academic hierarchies, or describing co-design without showing how decisions are actually shared. So as you're preparing your application, try to move beyond describing intentions and instead show reviewers how leadership and decision-making will work in practice. Before we finish this section, I want to leave you with one more way to think about co-design, because this is often where applications either become really strong or fall back into familiar patterns. At the NDRP, we think about co-design partnerships as a mutual exchange. I want to acknowledge that this framing draws on the Disability Advocacy Network Australia report, Co-Design Partnerships, a Mutual Exchange, which explores what genuine co-design partnerships look like in practice. This piece of work was funded by the NDRP. So that means partnerships where knowledge flows both ways, not just where one group provides expertise and another group simply receives it. So let's start with two-way learning. Strong partnerships involve two-way learning. Researchers need to be prepared to listen through difference, to reflect on their own assumptions and biases, and to work in ways that are safe and respectful, including trauma-informed approaches where relevant. In good partnerships, everyone learns and everyone's knowledge is valued. So next up, co-design also means shared decision-making from start to finish. So on the slide, we've got here co-define, co-design, co-create. So it's not just co-designing the proposal, but co-defining the problem, co-creating the work, and co-interpreting what the findings mean. This might look like co-authoring outputs, co-facilitating activities, or making sure outputs are accessible to different audiences from the beginning. Again, reviewers will be looking for evidence that this is built into your process, not added at the end. And lastly, we've got distribution of resources. So real partnerships require fair distribution of resources. That includes time, funding, access to data, and recognition. If one part of the partnership holds all the control or resources, then it is very difficult to demonstrate genuine shared leadership. So building on that idea of co-design as a mutual exchange, this slide really captures why this matters. At the NDRP, when we talk about true co-design, we're talking about three things coming together: mutuality, shared power, and fair resources. When those elements are present together, co-design moves beyond consultation and becomes genuine partnership. First, it elevates lived experience as authoritative knowledge. That means lived experience isn't something we simply include. It actively shapes decisions, priorities, and interpretation throughout the project. Second, it builds trust and reciprocity. Sorry, I for some reason can't say that word. Reciprocity, that's it, got it, in research partnerships. And this is important because strong partnerships are not transactional. They build on respect, shared learning, and accountability over time. And third, it gives us a roadmap for more inclusive and effective disability research. Projects that embed these principles tend to produce stronger research, stronger partnerships, and ultimately stronger policy and practice outcomes. So, as you think about your application, I encourage you to ask, where's the mutuality in our project? Where is power genuinely shared? And are resources distributed fairly to support that? Because these are signals that the reviewers will be looking for when they assess whether co-design is truly embedded. And with that, we'll move into the next part of the session where we'll look at how these principles show up in practical project planning and budgeting. So we're going to pause here for a short screen break. Please take about 10 minutes, stretch, grab a drink, or step away from the screen if you need to. And when we come back, Sue Tate will take us through budgeting for access and inclusion, which is where many of these principles become practical in your application.
Just wait for people to come back. Including Donna, our captioner. Thanks, Donna. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Sue Tape. I have the immense privilege to be the Deputy CEO of the National Disability Research Partnership and also Head of Evidence to Action. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm joining you today from the lands of the Yugara and the Turrbal people. And I just wanted to let you know that yes, you will be getting the slides, the updated slides. We had somebody with an eagle eye who noticed that I snuck in 2 new slides after sending it out to you, and all the links. So you'll get a couple of different documents because I'm going to take you through something about budgeting as well. And I'm going to pop the link in the chat, but I realized that it's much easier when you get it in one email. And we'll specifically send you the slides in PowerPoint version so that you can actually go through them with your teams as you're putting your applications together. And recognizing that you might also want to refer to the recording of this session as well and get people on your team to have a look. So you'll get all of that in email after the session. So I'm going to build on what Catherine has just covered and talk about how all these ideas translate into budgets, because budgeting for access and inclusion is really where good intentions become real practice. And we often see strong project ideas that have been weakened because access and inclusion for researchers with disability and people with disability haven't been planned or costed from the beginning. So this next section is about helping you think practically about how to resource inclusive disability-led research from the start. And strong projects plan for inclusion from the start. Because remember that budgeting is not just a financial exercise. Your budget tells reviewers how your project actually works, who is valued, who can participate, and whether inclusion has been planned from the start. And I have no excuse about the slides because I'm driving my own slides. The guidelines are very clear about what can be funded. So access costs, things like Auslan, captioning, easy read or easy English materials, translation, accessible outputs are legitimate and expected project costs. And that will obviously be dependent on the cohort that you are working with and the people who are on your team. And it's expected that you look and adapt accordingly. And also, very importantly, valuing lived experience expertise through paid roles or honoraria is also an eligible use of funding and expected use of funding. So they're not optional extras that you tack on at the end. They're part of delivering inclusive research. So as it says on the screen, eligible budget items include salaries and wages, honoraria, cold hard cash for co-designers with lived experience, travel and accommodation, accessible outputs, Auslan captioning, easy read, etc. And your budget is also expected to account for participating for the successful teams in communities of practice. So community of practice is something that the NDRP does, where successful funded teams will come together on a regular basis. And where people don't have that as part of their paid roles, we're expecting your budget to cover payment for their time and attendance and any access that's required. So we will obviously provide Auslan and captions as part of community of practice sessions. But if there is something extra, so if someone needs a communication partner or support worker hours in order to participate in the community of practice, that needs to be included in your budget. Budgets are not allowed to fund overheads of organisations, the purchase of capital equipment, and also this is very important and new for those who might have put in an application last time, subcontracting large parts of the project to people or organisations who are not listed as team members or partners. So common mistakes that we see include access costs added late or hidden in contingency budgets, budget lines that are too vague for reviewers to understand, underestimating the real cost of inclusive practice. And sometimes projects describe co-design or lived experience leadership, but there's no resourcing to support it. And another big one is another pitfall or common mistake is forgetting to budget for accessible outputs at the end of the project. So I'm just going to pop in the chat. There is a document, and this link will open up as a Word file that's going to download on your machine. And you'll be sent this. So if you're watching us from a machine where you don't want to download the Word file, that's okay. You're going to get this on the email as well. So this is a Word document that talks about all the detail around estimated costs, how to talk to partners about money, all the hopefully helpful things. And we've deliberately put it in a Word format, not as a PDF, so that you can use this file with your teams. You can add notes, delete things, copy and paste. So it is very deliberate as to why it's in Word format. You may find it useful to translate it over into Excel, because that's where you might need some formulas to work all this out and to work out people, but at least to start with this raw information, we wanted to be helpful. So tying back to what Catherine and Mary were talking about, a very quick self-check you can do before you submit your application is asking yourselves, does our budget reflect shared leadership? Do they look like they're working on the same project? Does the money talk to how the project is going to run or how you want it to run? Can people participate fully with the resources provided? Are access and inclusion clearly visible? And as I said, do your budget decisions match your co-design claims? And if a reviewer is trying to understand the project just by reading the budget, will they see who the people are and how it's going to work and how you're going to come together? We know that budgeting for access, inclusion, and lived experience leadership may feel unfamiliar, especially if you've not worked this way before. So that's why the resource is to help you translate these ideas into real budget decisions and to give you real dollar figures to think about. You might need a quick hit of coffee or something else strong after you look at the dollar figures involved. but we're not mucking around. This is important. So the document also has a partnership budgeting template. It talks about planning and costing access and inclusion. It gives you practical steps for how to pay people for their lived experience and their lived expertise. We've also put some frequently asked questions in there about what we know teams need to work through about payment and participation. We've tried to make this as easy as possible at the application and budgeting stage, because this is where good applications come undone in this area. So we're not prescribing exact costs. So you might live in a place where it's cheaper to get certain things done or more expensive to get certain things done. You might have communities for whom there is basically something like the wedding overhead. So when you go to organize a wedding and you tell someone that you want to book their function room for a wedding, the price goes up. The same happens with some access costs. So we know that, and we want you to just be intentional and considered about how you include that in your budget. And it's about also making sure your budget aligns with your governance and your co-design approach. You can use it as a starting point, adapt it, and as I said, build it into your own systems. If your budget tells the same story as your governance and your co-design sections, then you are usually on the right track. I'm just going to pause for a minute. I'm going to hand back to Mary and Catherine, and we're going to move into some questions and also talk about next steps. Mary, I'll hand back to you.
Mary speaking, and Sue, you can probably stop sharing the slides now if you'd like. This section, we had a whole range of questions that were submitted before this session, and we will go through those questions first. And I can see there's additional questions on the line, in the chat, sorry, and if we haven't answered them and don't get time to answer them today, that's okay. We will update our frequently asked questions as we're bringing new information so that everyone has exactly the same information. So please do keep putting your questions in the chat. So the first question that we've got asked is probably one that we've been asked quite a lot already and I'll be asking the questions and then Catherine will be answering the questions, or we might do a bit of swapping depending on the questions. So the first question is, can a person be involved in more than one application if they have different roles? So over to you, Catherine.
No. So every person listed as a team member can only appear on an application across the entire 2026 funding round. So that's regardless of whether they're a lead researcher, a co-researcher, advisor, or any other one.
Thank you. And does the one application rule only apply to lead investigators or chief investigators, knowing that we're not using that terminology in our application?
Yeah, so no, you're correct, Mary. We don't use that. We don't use those terms. But no, the rule applies to all named team members, not just lead roles. If someone is listed as part of a research team, they cannot appear on another application in any capacity.
So
Thank you.
speaking, Mary, sorry, can I throw a question in here that's been pre-submitted, if that's okay?
Sure.
So Fatima asked, we are currently in discussion with an organisational unit that sits within a broader umbrella entity. One unit with that umbrella, a research centre, is pursuing its own NDRP application with another partner and therefore would not be available to be named as a formal partner on our proposal. However, a different unit within the same umbrella organisation with separate staff and a distinct focus is interested in supporting a separate application through lived experience connections. Could you please advise whether this is a conflict or duplication?
I might hand over to you to tackle that one first, Catherine, and then I'll tackle at the end.
Okay, so sorry, I've just is the question, can more than one, sorry, can an organization be listed on multiple applications? Is that what the question is, as opposed to the substance of the actual content?
I think it's getting to I suppose the answer to the question is the restriction applies to individual people,
Yes,
not
yeah,
organizations. So
yes,
different units within the same organizations may be involved in separate applications, provided the same individual is not named across those multiple applications. So as long
yes.
as the roles and contributions are clearly defined, it would not be considered a conflict or a duplication.
Yes, yes. According to that rule, that essentially organizations are allowed to be are eligible to be involved in multiple applications, but individual people could only be named on one team. So it's fine if that if it's units from the same organization, as long as they're not the same people listed in the research team. Um, so um, so yes, if someone's, and I think this is also, I'd like to just note here that if it's an occasional contributor or workshop participant or an advisory group member who is not listed on the research team, then they don't actually count towards the one application rule. Okay, so the restriction applies to people, so individuals formally named as team members on the application.
Mary speaking. I'll also go to Ileana's question in the chat as well around, because it's linked to this. In the application form, there is no clear lead or chief application role unless I missed it, only contact person and team members. Is the contact person the lead? And can a project have two leads? Is there space or entry on the form to acknowledge this? I think it's really important to note that the contact person doesn't necessarily have to be a lead person. The contact person is really the person who we will liaise with about the grant throughout the whole process. And so it doesn't have to be the lead person. And so we will actually update the FAQs to make that a little bit clearer, Eliana. So thank you for that question. And as we said previously, we're trying to move away from that lead or chief investigator language because we want the power shared in our research team. Even though practically you might have someone who is the kind of the key person that's going to be the coordinator, but that would be in when you're describing the research team, what research team members are. The next question, I think we've covered, but what if someone only provides advice or attends a workshop? Does that account as someone who's part of a project team? So after you, over to you, Catherine.
No, no. As I was saying, occasional contributors, workshop participants, or advisory group members, if they're not they're not performing a meaningful role in the research team, they shouldn't be listed, and they also do not, and they're not counted towards the one application rule. No.
And I'm going to answer the next one because it is a decision that we've made. And the question is, why does the NDRP have this rule? And I guess one of the things that we're looking for is depth of partnership rather than a spread across partnerships. So the intent is to support genuine commitment, avoid conflicts, and encourage strong, focused partnerships rather than having lots of applications with lots of the same people in it. We're looking for depth rather than breadth of applications, and it was a very conscious and deliberate decision that we made at the NDRP. And related to this, and I know we're talking about this a lot, but I think this is highlighting the number of questions, is what happens if the same person appears on multiple applications, Catherine?
So applications may be deemed ineligible, or applicants may be asked to resolve the duplication. So it's very important for teams to check this early on.
Fantastic. Thank you. And we've talked about this quite a bit throughout the presentation, but how do we show lived experience leadership without being tokenistic? Over to you, Catherine.
So it really is about making sure that that we can actually see in practice how people are actually being included, and so that not like being specific about the roles, authority, and responsibilities, explaining who makes the decisions, how lived experience, expertise influences direction, and how leadership is embedded across governance and delivery, not just engagement activities.
Thank you. And there's an important question from Fatima in the chat that says, in the online application, it clearly states no research team or members or organisation. That must have been something that slipped through, because that would mean we would only have, say, for example, one application from one university. And we know that there's multiple universities that will want to be involved in it. So it only does apply to the members of the organisation, and we'll clarify that and make sure that that's updated, because then we would only have how many universities as partnerships? We'd only have one team from one, and we know that many universities have multiple teams. However, that said, and again, this is one of the kind of the grey areas. If you've got a partner who's a teeny tiny organisation with 5 staff, for example, and you've got 5 different people on 5 different applications partnering on that, questions about risk and whether that's feasible for listing the organisation 5 times on 5 different different applications. So it is a grey area in terms of as we said, we're after depth of partnerships, not tokenistic partnerships.
Mary,
Now,
Sue
sorry.
speaking. I was wondering if I could just group 2 questions together and respond, because this is something that people won't find in the FAQs. So there's a question about employing family members, and there's also a question about conflict of interest if you are related to another member on the research team as part of the partnering organisation. Just to clarify that in your budgeting for fair access and governance, the support that people need to be part of the team is something you budget for. The relationships of people, like who's related to who supports who, is only important to how you work as a team. It's not necessarily important as part of the application. So we won't be looking at similar surnames, and wondering, why Mr. Tully is related to somebody else who is part of the application. We already know the answer to that question, but it's important that you're structuring your teams to be best supported, and that is recognised in the budgeting and the access. So we're not going to be looking for conflicts of interest across the teams. We're looking for the structure to deliver the project, and the structure being driven by co-design and leadership. And
Thanks very
sorry to
much.
pick on you, Peter.
And thank you. And there is a section in the application form that does talk about risks and how risks can be managed through the project. So if you do think that's a risk, be prepared to the reviewers will be looking at how you're thinking about these sort of things, and it will only strengthen your application if you explain what you think is other information that the review panels will need. Okay, I'm moving around on some of these questions, Catherine, sorry, because some of them we've already answered.
Sue speaking. Mary, can I throw another one in then? Is it all right?
Okay, yes.
So one of the questions is that in the chat is it favorable to have a new project or can funding apply to an existing project?
I might start that and then Catherine, if you've got anything else to add. we You need to be very careful that you're not double dipping. And that if you've already got a funded project, it's not about co-funding an existing project. However, if you've got a funded project and this is a new element that's going to build on or a new piece of research, then, explain that. And so I guess the main thing to consider is, would it be seen as double dipping with another funding source? And if so, it's probably not going to be successful. So it is one of those grey areas again, but please think, if you've already done a research project that then requires further research, then of course, then that's completely different. And that's how knowledge is generated. Knowledge is generated by doing some work, building on that work. So, yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, Catherine.
No, episode.
Fantastic. All right. The next question is, how do we show shared power in practice? And Catherine, sorry, over to you.
Yes, sorry. Okay, so sorry, I was actually responding to another question in the chat. All right, so so the question was, how do we show shared practice power in? Sorry, Mary, could you
Sorry,
repeat the
I'll say it
question
again. How do we show shared power in practice?
Okay, all right. So this is really about like ways you could do this could include describing concrete mechanisms, shared governance groups, co-chairs, voting arrangements, co-authorship, shared facilitation, or other structures that demonstrate real decision-making authority.
Okay. And then the next one is, what if our project is university-led?
University-led projects are welcome, but leadership must still be shared. So strong applications will show how disability community partners and people with disability influence governance and direction.
Okay, and kind of another additional question that goes to this is, how detailed do roles need to be in the application?
So roles should be clear enough that reviewers understand who does what and how leadership is distributed. If there are vague or generic descriptions, it will make it hard to assess the strength of the co-design.
Fantastic. And I'm going to go to Teresa's question in the chat, which is, we want to significantly involve people with intellectual disability, but also their family members and community allies as this applies to the research question. Will NDRP consider the lived experience of family members just as valid as people with disability? And the answer to that is yes. And so, for example, when you're doing research about young children may not be able to be involved in the research. The people involved in the research need to be appropriate to the research question, as you said. And for people with the intellectual disability, their family members are can be a really positive support network for people with intellectual disability. So of course that would be completely eligible. But if you had an application that was about people with disability that didn't include any people with disability and only used families or caregivers as a proxy, the review panel might ask some questions. Why aren't people with intellectual disability or people with disability who your research is about not involved in this research? I hope that's a clear enough answer to that question. And Belinda's question and I might just, so you're not just hearing my voice, is must the topic area specifically address one of the research questions listed under the research areas of safety and inclusion, or will other topics that fall within safety and inclusion, but not specifically listed, be considered? And I might hand over to Sue to answer that one. Um, and I'll add on to you, Sue, at the end of that.
Sue speaking. Thank you. And thank you, Belinda, for the question. It's a good one. So um, there are 12 areas in NDRP's research agenda, and the research agenda document that you can access from our website includes some sub-questions that were brought together as part of the consultation process that happened around developing the research agenda, which was done by the working party who were part of developing the NDRP. So if you're talking about the two opportunities that are more general and where research teams can define the research question, yes, sub-questions that are not necessarily listed will be considered. Where you can address the 5 criteria, and those 5 criteria being about relevance to the topic of safety or access and inclusion and potential for policy and system impact. If you can talk to how the methodology, the quality, the leadership, the capacity to deliver, the risk management, etc. So I think the relevance to the topic and the potential for policy and system impact, if your cohort is very narrow and there's no national potential for impact or impact outside of your particular cohort that you're working with or researching, that's where it gets a bit harder. So the sub-questions are examples, they are guides, and there may well be things under that that have developed. For example, there's not a great deal of mention of AI in the 12 research agenda questions because it wasn't as big a thing or an issue or a concern or an opportunity, depending on how you look at it. But, and also things do evolve, and it's a very broad research agenda. So there is the opportunity to do things quite specific and that may not be mentioned. And it's about how you explain to us what the question is, what the problem is you're addressing, how have you developed that problem statement, and who's going to be involved in clarifying the impact of the research.
Fantastic. And so I might just get you to put up the criteria again. We did go over that fairly quickly, but that helps to illustrate the question. Yeah. So whilst we only spoke in this session predominantly about criterion 3, what you need to do is a relevance of the topic and the potential for policy and system impact on the 2 topic areas of safety and accessible inclusive communities. And if you're doing targeted research on restrictive practices, you will need to speak about the relevance of the topic to restrictive practices. Obviously, the research quality and methodology is a 30% weighting, which I think goes to Andreas's comment around how to balance the tension between clearly stating the topic focus of the project and actually co-designing the study. And so that research quality and methodology is one element alongside the relevance of the topic for potential policy and system, leadership of inclusion of people with disability, which is worth 25%, capacity and resources to deliver the project, and then that risk management and value for money. And so that's where I was talking about the risk management, understanding what the risks of the research are, as well as why it's important to invest in this research. So I hope that answers your question there, Andreas. So you can stop sharing that now, and I'll go back to the payment one. That I can see Fatima has put in the chat. Could you clarify how NDRP would like research team members' time to be treated where individuals can't be paid through their organisations, such as holding an honorary appointment or being unable to receive payment, for example, due to visa restrictions? Could they be paid an honorarium? The answer, I think, is yes. You don't have to have all the answers decided before you submit your application, but under your risk situation, you might say, well, we need to work through the process of how we're going to pay people because we haven't yet got a mechanism. I think showing that you understand some of the challenges around the payments, including it in your budget, and understanding if you haven't got all the answers yet, but you're going to find out the answers as part of your project, then that's okay too. And there is also a section, as Sue's mentioned, on in-kind budget items as well, and if there's in-kind provided. I might now just pause. We've got 10 minutes left to check with the team. I know there's people asking questions in the Q&A who may not want to, about whether there's any further questions that you would like answered.
Sue speaking. No, we've got a gloriously open group who are asking all their questions in the chat. Which, to be honest, thank you very much. I know it can be scary when you don't know who the other people are. So we really appreciate your comfort with this session. Makes it straightforward for us. I can't emphasize enough, and I know Mary's going to say this again later, but a lot of the questions are in the detail. And so sitting down with the guidelines and the form, you can, when you open up Smarty Grants, there is a button over to the right-hand side which allows you to preview and even print a preview of the form, which will show you all the sections and the questions and what it looks like. But you can always start another application. If you feel like you've mucked up the form, you can always start another one. There's nothing against that. And people who aren't going to be submitting the form can still also open the form and look at the sections that they want to help answer with. And Catherine, I understand also we're going to have a plain text or
Yes.
yeah. Do you want to talk about
Yes.
that for a minute?
Yes, so that should be available sometime this week. We're hoping for tomorrow that that'll be available. And so that'll be in a Word. Um,
Yep. One of the things that Mary was talking about not doing things at the last minute. We know from last year, the most significant technical or technology challenge that people had was copying and pasting or cutting and pasting from a document that the team had worked on and popping that into Smarty Grants at the last minute. Smarty Grants doesn't like formatted text. It likes plain text. So leave yourselves plenty of time to get information from wherever you've worked on it as a team and move it over into your Smarty Grants form because it doesn't like complicated text. And there's a very easy way to right click and paste as plain text. But I know in the hurry for the person who's been allocated the task of submitting the form, that can feel very stressful and you might forget to do. But that's the thing that we found was that if people were trying to paste from beautifully formatted documents into Smarty Grants gets grumpy. The other thing is that Smarty Grants will log you out after 20 minutes. So you need to be ready and organized when you're going to use your form. You need to be pressing save regularly. And these might seem like really straightforward ideas, but we know that in the last minute and in the stress, this is the stuff that trips people up. And we're interested in what you've spent time constructing and putting together as a team. And we want you to be successful at the first hurdle, which is getting the thing into Smarty Grants and getting the form submitted. So we appreciate that it might sound like we're telling you something simple, but it's really important.
I might go to the last question that we have time for, and and it's from Francisco saying, I'm a little confused regarding the disability-led organisation. Can you talk a little bit about that, please? A disability-led organisation is an organisation that has people with disability involved in the governance of the organisation, on the staff, and it may have members that are people with disability as well. And often those types of organisations might be disability advocacy organisations or disability capacity strengthening organisations. And that's what when we talk about a disability-led organisation. However, your partner doesn't necessarily need to be a disability-led organisation. Your partner might be really relevant to the type of research you're doing. It might be a community service organisation, for example. However, you would need to talk about how your team is actually ensuring disability leadership and disability co-governance, if you like, through the research team. I hope that answers your question, Francisco. But if you want to have a look at the types of teams that were funded in our 2025 research funding round, we've got a list of the types of organisations who were the organisations and the partner organisation. We'll update the answer for the next question around the budget is teacher buyout through the FAQ. I think that's a pretty specific question, so we just wouldn't mind a bit of time to update the FAQ on that. We're updating the FAQs weekly. So over to you, Sue. I see you've got your hand up.
Sue speaking. I think it's just an important one, Felicity's question that's in there. So Felicity's asked, we talk about the importance of lived experience. Is this the way those with a disability are partners in the project, or do at least some of the researchers have a disability as well? Both, and it depends. So it comes down to what is the group of people with disability that your research is about, and that's the lived experience that is highly valued. The people that are experiencing the problem that you've identified or the research that you want to do, and the expectation that people with disability can be part of the research team around which the research is done. And that they are at the table for, as Catherine was talking about, the co-design and the decisions that are made. One of the challenges we saw in previous rounds is that there were teams who had people with researchers with a disability, but the disability didn't necessarily relate to the cohort that they were engaging with. So that's where there's a disconnect between the research question and the composition of the research team. So if you're doing a research or you're looking to pull together a research team around the experiences of people with intellectual disability, we expect people with intellectual disability to be part of your research team. And as I think Francisco's also asked a question about family members, if people need support to participate, which we would expect, then yes, they are part of the team as well. But the people with intellectual disability are the people with lived experience of whatever it is that you're researching. Similarly, if you're researching a project around physical disability, the people we want you to have as the lived experience is a person with physical disability. So obviously in some of the research questions, there are shared experiences across disability cohorts or people who have different or multiple disabilities, but we want to see a connection between the research question and the lived experience that you have on your team.
We've run out of time, I'm sorry, and there's still some more questions. But I'll get you to put the registration for the next Q&A sessions where we can go into depth in answering some of these questions, including the teacher buyout, the buyout of academic time. We'll come back to you on that one and update the FAQ so it's really, really clear. And I'll get you to share the slides again, Sue. So remembering that the core information sources are Sorry, I'm not sure if you've got that slide up there. The guiding principles, the research agenda, the funding policy, the funding guidelines, the frequently asked questions. Please keep an eye on those frequently asked questions for probity so that everyone has the same answer. We will make all our frequently asked questions publicly available. And we can't give you advice on your individual project. I think it's really important to state. If it's specific to your project, we won't be able to answer that, and we won't be able to answer that because we're in a probity situation where people are competing against us, but we can answer questions about the parameters, the scope of funding and things like that. In terms of the weekly FAQs and the drop-in sessions, if you've got a specific question that we haven't answered, please email us at research at ndrp.org.au. The team have been answering already a lot of questions that have been sent to us via email. Thank you for joining us today. We would love your feedback, and Sue is going to pop up the feedback. You can submit your questions. We've got a QR code. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's sessions. We're always looking to improve how we support people, and your feedback helps us refine our approach. And thank you very much. We're here to provide guidance and support through these sessions. We can't wait to see the innovative ideas that you're going to be putting into your applications. And thank you again, and we hope to see you again at a future event or drop-in session. So thank you very much.